Hello fam, welcome back to my channel. Thank you all for clicking on the link to watch this video. Thank you for always sharing my video, and thanks to everyone who has subscribed to my channel. To my old subscribers, thank you so much. To the new ones also, thank you. And for those of you who haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe to my channel. So today, what will I be sharing with you? It's admission time, which means most schools will be sending out admission letters. So I just wanted to share some tips with you regarding how the admission letters are sent to most of the admitted students. So usually when schools send out the admission letters, it comes in three forms. So one is they might send out an admission letter with a funding letter. So that means they'll send out an admission letter and also tell you that you've been considered for funding. The next one is the school might send out an admission letter with no indication about funding. So with this, they'll send out an admission letter, but they wouldn't say anything about funding. And the third is a school would send out an admission letter with an indication about funding. So they'll indicate something about funding. They'll put funding information there. However, they'll tell you that you were not considered for funding. So what do you do in all these scenarios? I'm going to share with you what you have to do if you receive an admission letter without funding indication, and if you receive an admission letter but you were not considered for funding. And everything I'll be sharing is based on my previous experiences. So the first one I mentioned, if you receive an admission letter and they tell you were considered for funding, then congratulations, that means you are set to go and you can proceed with the next steps. However, I want to talk about the other two scenarios. So the first is if you receive an admission letter with no indication about funding. What do? Do you just sit and just wait on the school, or do you take an action? So sometimes people will just relax and just be waiting on the funding information without taking any action. Don't do that. Always do a follow-up. So always send an email to the graduate coordinator or whoever you were talking to before you applied for the program, and ask them. So if there is no indication about funding, ask them if you should expect information about funding, and also ask for the specific timeline or date that you should expect to receive information about funding. So always do that. Why am I saying you should do this? I'm going to use myself as an example. When I applied for my master's program, one of the schools sent out a letter to me that I've been admitted, but they did not indicate anything about funding. So I reached out to the graduate coordinator and I asked, when should I expect funding information, or which will I even get funding? So what the graduate coordinator sent me a form to fill about funding and graduate assistantship. So which means with this school, they'll usually admit students before giving you the go ahead to fill the forms about funding. And I did not know this, so I thought once you applied you would be considered for funding, and I did not know that I had to wait, or I had to receive admission before I could apply for the funding. So what I'm saying is, if I hadn't reached out, I would have missed out on applying for the funding because there was a deadline. So when I reached out to the school, they told me, oh, you have to be admitted before. So now that you've been admitted, fill out this form and send it back to us. So that's why it's important to do a follow-up. Now, a friend of mine recently got admission for this fall semester, and her letter also came with no indication about funding. So she reached out to me and I asked her to email the graduate coordinators. She did, and they also sent her a form to fill out about assistantship. So if she also did not reach out, she might have missed out on that form, not knowing that like she had to fill that form in order to be considered for funding. So always reach out if your letter does not say anything about funding. On the first scenario again, when you reach out and they tell you you were not considered for funding, so sometimes some schools will not consider you for funding, but they will not mention it in the admission letter, and they will not say anything about it. So if you reach out to them and they tell you you were not considered for funding, or they don't have any funding for you, what do you have to do? So then one thing I'll tell you is, sometimes people will reject the school because they were not considered for funding. Don't reject the school. Don't especially if that's the only school you apply to. Even if you apply to several schools, wait on all the other schools before you reject an admission letter because you were not considered for funding. So do not reject the school if they tell you they cannot consider you for funding. What you should do is to defer, or tell the school that in that case you are going to defer, or because you cannot attend the school without funding. Always let them know that you cannot attend the school without funding. So what you should do is tell them, can you defer, or you just tell them you like to defer and wait till next year and give it a try again if you could get funding. So the US schools, you can defer to I think 2 years. So if you defer, you can just ask the school, so what can you do to increase your chances of getting funding in the next year? So that's something you should do, or these are some of the questions you should ask them. Now the next thing is you receive a letter with admission with funding details. However, they tell you that you were not considered for funding at this moment or at this point. What should you do? In this case as well, you should reach out to the graduate coordinators or head of the department and ask them if you were put on a waiting list. So sometimes if you are not considered for funding, that does not mean like you were not considered at all. They might have put you on a wait list. So reach out to them and ask them if they put you on a wait list or you were just not considered at all. So one, if they tell you you were put on a wait list, that means they are waiting for other students to make a decision. So if other students reject their offer, then you might have a spot for that particular offer. So if they tell you were put on a wait list, then you would have to relax and wait for some time. However, after a week or two, make sure you do a follow-up, because you might not be the only student who was put on a wait list, and other students might be following up frequently. So it's always important that if you're put on a wait list, you should still do a follow-up and ask them, oh, I was put on a wait list. Is there any chance now, or is there any opportunity now? So always try to do that. The next is if you reach out to them and they tell you were not put on a wait list, you were just not considered for funding because we don't have any funding available. What should you do? In this case, you should ask the school or the department if there are other funding information or other funding details available outside the department. So if there are other funding details available outside the department, ask them if they could suggest some to you so that you give it a try. So sometimes outside the particular program or department that you apply for, there might be funding in other departments in the school. So if you ask this question, if there are any available, they would suggest it to you, and then you can give it a try, so you can apply for this funding information in other departments. So it's always important for you to ask if there are other funding opportunities outside your program, and then you apply or give it a try. And the other is you should also ask the school if there are any professors within your department or outside your department that have grants for research. So sometimes you might not get a teaching assistantship or a research assistantship, but there might be specific professors within your department that have research grants and probably need students to work with them on their grant. So if you ask and there are professors available, the graduate coordinator or whoever you are in touch with might suggest some of these professors to you within your department and outside your department. So what do you have to do? I'll advise that once these professors are suggested, you just go to the website and read about them and reach out to them. So you reach out to them with knowledge about what they are doing or like what their research entails, and just kind of ask them if they'll be willing to offer you funding for you to work with them on their project, or just tell them you are interested in working on this particular project with them. So if they have a grant and they feel like you have the skills and expertise, they might offer you funding for you to like be their RA so that you can work on their projects with them. So it's the same thing you do with outside professors who have grants. So these are some of the important things you should always do. If you are not considered for funding in your department, ask for funding details outside your department. Ask for professors who have grants for research within your department and outside your department. And always remember, if you don't receive funding at all, even if there's no funding outside the department, if no professor has funding, and if your department also does not fund you, do not reject the admission, especially if that's the only school you applied to. And if you've not yet heard from the other schools, don't reject the admission. Just defer, and just let them know that you are deferring because you cannot attend the program or the school without funding. So you would defer for now and try again next year for funding. So you try applying for funding again next year, especially if the funding application process is separate. So in this case, you ask them that what can you do then to increase your chances of getting funding within the next year. So these are some of the things that you have to do. I hope this will benefit or help those of you out there who have received admission letters without funding details or without any funding consideration. So thank you all for watching this video. If this video was really helpful and beneficial to you, please click on the link to subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.